Step aside, Mercer. Hand over the Apache. She's not going anywhere.
You take children and call it education. I set them free. If that makes me a criminal, so be it.
Single father, working Christmas Eve. The Apache woman who brought him fire changed everything Bitter Creek, Montana territory. December 24, 1887. The barn smelled of frozen hay and cattle breath, the kind of cold that clung to woodcloth and bone with equal stubbornness. Silas Mercer sat on a wooden crate, his boots caked with ice, his hands wrapped around a strip of dried beef that had gone stiff in the cold. The lantern beside him threw out a thin, meager light, more shadow than flame, but enough to show the tight lines carved into his weather-worn face. Beside him, his son Eli chewed slowly, mechanically, his small legs swinging above the frozen ground. The boy didn't shiver, didn't complain, didn't even blink at the cold anymore. Children adjusted faster than grown men, faster than they should have to. 112 cattle shifted in their stalls. Their breath steamed in the darkness like ghosts rising from the floorboards. 2 years ago, there had been 160. The winter of '86 had taken 48 head, along with everything else that mattered. Christmas Eve had fallen silent over the valley, so silent that even the cattle seemed to respect it. 3 miles east, the town of Bitter Creek glowed with lamplight. Silas could see it through the open barn door windows, flickering like fallen stars, smoke rising from chimneys where families gathered around tables heavy with roast beef and apple pie. Somewhere in that distant warmth, carolers were singing. The sound drifted across the snow, faint and foreign, like music from another world. Eli finished his jerky. He did not ask for more. He never asked for anything anymore. That worried Silas more than crying would have. Papa. The word was barely a whisper, but it cut through the cold like a knife. Yeah, son. Is Mama watching us from heaven? Silas's throat closed. He managed a nod. Words wouldn't come. They never did when Eli asked about Clara. 2 years gone now, taken by fever that burned through her in 4 days. Doc Halloran had tried everything herbs, hot stones, prayers, whiskey. Nothing worked. Her last words had been for Eli, take care of our boy, and Silas had been failing at it ever since. The church bell rang 8 times. Each tone hung in the frozen air before fading into silence, like the valley itself was holding its breath. Eli leaned against his father's arm. His small body was warm, despite the cold, a little furnace of life, trying to survive winter's cruelty. I miss her. I know. Silas put his hand on the boy's shoulder, rough palm covering a space that used to fit neatly into Clara's hand. Me too. Through the barn door, the lights of Bitter Creek twinkled and mocked. Silas told himself they were fine. They had shelter. They had enough food. They had work to keep them busy. They didn't need caroling or feasting or any of the trappings of celebration. But Eli's small sigh cut through all his rationalizations. The boy was 5 years old and had already learned to expect nothing. Before we continue, drop a comment with the number 1 if you're watching from somewhere cold tonight. And don't forget to subscribe for more Wild West stories. Snow drifted past the barn door in slow, heavy sheets. The wind had begun to rise again, rattling loose boards and whispering through the rafters. Silas stood brushed straw from his coat and took one last glance toward the warm glow of Bitter Creek. The voices of the carolers were fading, swallowed by distance and wind. He closed the barn door halfway, keeping the night at bay, but not entirely shutting it out. Habit. Hope. Maybe both. The knock came just after 9. A single heavy rap against wood, confident, urgent, not the timid tapping of a traveler begging shelter. Silas's hand moved to the Winchester, leaning against the workbench. Montana Territory in December was not a place for carelessness. Rustlers. Drunks wandering from town. Railroad men enforcing claims that weren't theirs. 100 dangers could appear in the night without warning. He motioned for Eli to stay put and moved toward the barn door, boots crunching on straw and frost. The figure standing in the snow was not what he expected. A woman. Young, maybe mid-20s. Apache by her features, high cheekbones, dark hair, matted with ice skin the color of autumn earth. She wore a deerskin dress, torn at the shoulder, and through the tear, Silas could see blood. Fresh blood bright against the white snow that clung to her. Her breath came in ragged clouds. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were black and burning. She spoke one word, shaped more by breath than voice. Fire. Silas didn't move. His hand stayed near the rifle. An Apache woman alone in a blizzard wounded 3 miles from town on Christmas Eve. Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this was safe. Not for his cattle, not for his ranch, not for Eli. But before he could speak, Eli slipped past him. Hold on, Silas reached for the boy, but Eli was already in the snow. The child walked straight to the woman, took her frozen hand in both of his small ones, and pulled. Come inside, Eli said. It's cold. It was the most words he'd spoken in a single breath since Clara died. Silas watched his son lead the stranger toward the cabin, and something cracked in his chest, something frozen that had nothing to do with the weather. Something he had forced into stillness since the fever took his wife. He let out a long breath, and he followed them inside. Her name was Aiyana. She told him this while he cleaned the wound on her shoulder, a bullet graze, not deep but ugly. Someone had shot at her and nearly connected. She sat rigid on the kitchen chair, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the wall. She did not flinch when he poured whiskey over the torn flesh, did not make a sound when he pressed clean cloth against it. Who did this? Silas asked. Aiyana said nothing. Apache, don't come this far north in winter. Not alone. Not wounded. He tied off the bandage, his movements efficient. He'd done this before, for soldiers, for ranch hands, for Clara when she'd cut her hand on the hay scythe. Someone's looking for you. Still, nothing. The fire popped in the stove. Wind pressed against the windows like a restless animal. Eli sat on the rug, hugging his knees, watching every movement with solemn eyes far too old for his years. When Aiyana shivered, Eli rose and disappeared into the small bedroom. He returned with a wool blanket, the one Clara had made their last winter together, blue and gray with uneven stitches. Silas hadn't touched it in 2 years. Couldn't bear to. Aiyana looked at the boy. Something shifted in her face, the hard mask softening just slightly. Thank you, she said. Her English was careful, accented, but clear. Eli smiled. Silas couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son smile. That first night, they sat around the fire in silence. Silas kept his rifle within reach, leaning against the hearth. Aiyana kept her distance, wrapped in Clara's blanket, her wounded shoulder turned toward the flames. Eli fell asleep between them, his small body curled on the rug, like a question mark, the blanket's edge brushing his cheek. The wind howled outside. Snow piled against the windows. The world beyond the cabin walls had become a white void, impassable until morning. Silas watched the woman from the corner of his eye. She was watching the fire like it held answers. Her hands, resting on her knees, were calloused and scarred, working hands, healer's hands. Around her neck hung a leather cord with a small beaded pouch, turquoise and red glinting in the firelight. "You're a medicine woman," he said. It wasn't a question. Aiyana's eyes moved to him. Dark, unreadable. I was. She looked back at the fire. Some things cannot be healed. Silas stared at the flames, too listening to the crackle, the wind, the soft breathing of his sleeping child. He understood that better than she knew. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he wondered whether the fire in his home might thaw more than the cold. Day 2. Silas woke to the smell of something cooking. For a disorienting moment, he thought Clara was alive, that the past 2 years had been a fever dream, that she was in the kitchen making breakfast while Eli still slept in the crook of her arm. Her scent had always been warm, things bread, sage, tallow steam rising off a pot of beans. For a heartbeat, he let himself believe. But when he opened his eyes, it was Aiyana standing at the stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled of sage and rabbit, the steam curling around her like a faint spirit. "Where did you snare?" She didn't look at him. Her tone was simple fact, nothing more. "Said it before dawn. Your son showed me where the rabbits run." Silas pushed himself upright, covers falling away. Eli was already at the table, small hands folded neatly, watching Aiyana with something that looked dangerously close to wonder. "She taught me how to tie the knot, Papa. The special one that doesn't come loose." "Did she?" Silas said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "And she knows songs. Real songs, not like the ones at church." Aiyana set a bowl in front of the boy. "Eat." Eli obeyed without complaint, without being asked twice, without the hollow mechanical chewing he'd done for months, eating as if food were a chore rather than comfort. Now he dug into the stew with eager, hungry movements, as though warmth and flavor meant something again. Silas watched his son shovel stew into his mouth like a child who expected to enjoy things and felt something dangerous stir in his chest. Hope. He buried it quickly. Hope was a trap. Hope was how you got hurt. Hope was what had broken him the night Clara's breath rattled into silence. He dragged a hand over his face. "You don't need to work," he muttered toward Aiyana. "You're hurt." "My legs work." She ladled stew into a second bowl and slid it across the table for him. "And your land is quiet. Too quiet. Needed to move." Silas took the bowl. She was right. The winter silence was the kind that pressed against a man's ribs until something inside cracked. Day 3. The snow stopped. The sky cleared to a brutal, merciless blue, the kind that hurt to look at, the kind that made every shadow sharper and every sound smaller. Silas spent the morning checking fences, while Aiyana stayed with Eli. The drifts along the north line were waist-deep. He had to shovel his way to the posts and bang the ice off wire that had frozen stiff. The wind bit into him through every seam in his coat, finding the skin beneath like it held a grudge. By the time he returned, his beard was crusted with frost. He found them in the barn. Eli was sitting cross-legged on a hay bale, his eyes closed, his small hands resting on his knees the way Clara used to guide him when she prayed. Aiyana sat across from him, posture identical, straight back, closed eyes, palms up. Between them, a small fire burned in a tin bucket, controlled, careful, just enough to warm the air without risk to the hay. Aiyana was singing. The melody was nothing Silas recognized. It wasn't a hymn, wasn't a saloon tune, wasn't any soldier's marching song he'd heard. It was low and rhythmic, more breath than sound words, in a language older than English. The notes rose and fell like wind through narrow canyon walls, like water gliding over stones, like something older than fences and borders and men with rifles. Eli was mouthing the words, not singing, not yet, but trying, learning. His lips shaped unfamiliar sounds, reaching for a language Silas had never taught him, a language he had no right to. Silas stood in the doorway, frozen in place. The barn felt warmer than outside, but the warmth hit him in the wrong place, somewhere beneath his ribs. Claire used to sing to Eli every night. Hymns, mostly. Sometimes lullabies her own mother had sung to her. After she died, Eli had stopped asking for songs, had stopped asking for anything at all. Now here was this stranger, this Apache woman who had walked out of a blizzard and bled on his floor, teaching his boy to sing again. Aiyana opened her eyes and saw him. She did not stop singing. And Silas did not ask her to. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, pretending he'd come just to check the stalls. But he stayed until the last note faded, watching Eli's chest rise with a calm he hadn't seen in years. Watching a kind of healing he did not understand. Day 4. They came just after noon. 4 riders approaching from the east road, their horses' breath steaming in the cold like smoke from small, weary fires. Silas saw them from the porch silhouettes, dark against the hard winter light, and knew immediately what they were. Blue coats. Cavalry insignia. The lead rider sat his horse like a man who expected the world to move aside. His back straight, his coat polished despite the weather. Silas's jaw tightened. "Get inside," he said to Aiyana. "Don't come out." She didn't argue. She took Eli's hand and disappeared into the back room like she'd been trained her whole life to vanish quickly. Silas stepped off the porch. The riders stopped at the fence line. The lead man dismounted tall, lean, with a mustache that had gone gray like ash and eyes the color of dirty ice. Silas Mercer. He said it like a statement carved in iron. "I'm Captain Josiah Hammond. Mind if we have a word? You're having one?" Hammond smiled. It pulled at his mouth, but didn't touch his eyes. "We're looking for a woman." Apache. Mid-20s, wounded, probably traveling alone. She'd have come through here in the last few days. "Haven't seen anyone," Silas said, voice flat. "That's so." Hammond reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He took his time, unfolding it, smoothing each crease like he enjoyed the ritual. Finally, he held it up. A wanted poster. A likeness of a woman's face, high cheekbones, strong jaw, dark eyes full of fire. Aiyana's face. Below the drawing double, UANTED $200, REWARDARSO, NDEAE, NTAO, AFMIL, ITAARER, YNIELEUSU, EONRULET, SSOLDIERS. She burned a supply tent at Fort Benton. Hammond said. Attacked 2 of my men when they tried to stop her. Dangerous woman. Savage, really. Silas's teeth ground together at the word savage. Hammond folded the poster and tucked it into his coat. You sure you haven't seen her? Silas met his gaze. Held it. Didn't blink. I'm sure. A long silence followed, the kind that gathered its own weight. Then Hammond smiled again, cold, empty, the smile of someone who had buried things under snow before. Well, if you do see her, there's money in it. And the gratitude of the United States Army. He mounted his horse. We'll be back through in a few days. Winter's not going anywhere. Neither is she. The riders turned and headed back toward the road, hooves cracking ice beneath them. Silas watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside. Aiyana was waiting in the kitchen. Her face was calm, but her hands, those steady healer's hands, were trembling. You should not have lied for me, she said quietly. Probably not. He will come back. He will find out. Probably. Aiyana stared at him as though the answer she sought was hidden somewhere behind his eyes. Why Silas thought about the question. Thought about Eli, singing in the barn. Eli, eating without fear. Eli smiling for the first time in 2 long broken years. Thought about Clara's voice in his dreams, telling him to stop being afraid. Because my boy laughed yesterday, he said. First time since his mother died. Because you did that. Because I don't know how, but you did. Aiyana's eyes filled not with tears, not with fear, something older. Something he couldn't name. She looked away. The tent I burned, she said softly. It was not supplies. Silas felt his breath lock in his chest. What was it, children? The word cracked in her throat. He had taken children from the reservation. 6 of them. Youngest was 4 years old. He said they were being educated. Disgust twisted the final word. I got them out. Burned the tent to cover their escape. His men caught me, but the children were already gone. Silas felt something cold and poisonous settle in his stomach. Where are they now safe? With their families. Aiyana met his eyes again. I am not sorry for what I did. I would do it again. Silas nodded, slowly, jaw tight. Good. The word landed like a promise. Or a warning. Or both. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping snow across the yard like a white tide. Inside, for the first time in years, the cabin felt like it held more than grief. It held purpose. And danger. And something that looked suspiciously like the beginning of a fight Silas had been avoiding for far too long. Hammond came back with 6 men instead of 4. Silas saw them coming from the barn, a line of blue coats against the hard white snow, riding in a tight formation that meant they weren't here to talk anymore. Their horses threw up thin sprays of frost with each step. The sun was high, but weak, shining through that winter haze that made everything feel brittle, breakable. He had maybe 3 minutes before they reached the house. Aiyana. She was already moving. She always moved like someone who'd spent her life expecting danger, not startled, not panicked, simply ready. She pulled on her coat, grabbed the small bundle of dried herbs and rabbit meat she'd been carrying everywhere since she arrived, and tied the leather cord of her medicine pouch tighter around her neck. Her wound had closed, but she still held her left shoulder stiff to protect it. "I will go," she said. "Lead them away. They will not hurt you if I am gone." "No." "Silas, I said no." The word cracked in the cold air like a split board. Eli appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up from sleep, his small face pale and frightened. He looked at his father, then at Aiyana, then back at Silas again, as if trying to measure the invisible tension weaving between them. "Papa," he whispered, "are the bad men coming back?" "Yes, son, they are." "Are they going to take her away?" Silas looked down at him, really looked, and something in him softened, then steeled. Eli had lost enough. The boy's whole world had collapsed once already. Silas knelt so their eyes were level. "What do you think we should do?" Eli's breath hitched. His hands twisted in the hem of his shirt, fingers pulling the fabric into tight wrinkles. It was a nervous habit he developed after Clara died, a way to hold himself together when he didn't know how else to stay upright. Then slowly something changed in him. He straightened his spine, lifted his chin. A tiny soldier facing an army. She stays. Eli, she stays, Papa. His voice trembled, but he didn't back down. She's mine. She sings to me. She teaches me things. Mama would want her to stay. Silas felt his throat close. Felt the world tilt just slightly. Aiyana was staring at Eli, with tears falling silently down her face, as if she'd never expected anyone, least of all a child, to claim her that way. "You heard the boy?" Silas said, rising. He reached for his rifle, hanging by the door. "She stays." Hammond stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch. His men fanned out behind him, 6 rifles resting casually across saddles, 6 pairs of eyes, assessing the cabin, the barn, the windows. They weren't scouts today. They were hunters. The captain's face was almost pleasant, the kind of smile a man wears before he lies. "Mr. Mercer, seems you weren't entirely honest with me the other day." Silas stepped onto the porch rifle, held low but ready. "Seems so. I'm going to need you to step aside." "Hand over the woman. This doesn't have to get ugly. She's not going anywhere." Hammond's smile cracked, then disappeared entirely. "You're protecting an arsonist. A savage who attacked American soldiers. You really want to die for that? She burned a tent to free children you kidnapped." A sound moved through the soldiers, not quite a gasp, but an uncomfortable shift, saddles creaking as a few men straightened. Hammond's eyes iced over. "Careful, Mercer. That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." "It's her word against mine," Hammond said, spreading his hands. "And she's Apache. Who do you think people will believe the door behind Silas creaked open?" Eli stepped out onto the porch. He walked past his father, past the rifle, past the threshold that had always been a barrier between boyhood and danger. He stood on the top stair, a little figure in a too-big coat and boots that didn't quite fit. He faced 6 armed soldiers with the grim determination of someone who had already lost too much. "Go away." His voice rang clear across the yard, steadier than Silas expected, loud enough that even the horses flicked their ears toward him. Hammond blinked. "Son, this isn't. She's mine." Eli planted his feet. "She's my friend. She sings to me. You can't have her." Silas stepped forward, not touching the boy, but standing beside him close enough that Eli could lean against him if he needed to. He didn't. Aiyana appeared in the doorway behind them, unarmed, unafraid, her dark eyes fixed on Hammond with something that wasn't anger. It was pity, the kind that cuts deeper than hate. "You take children from their families," she said quietly. The wind caught her hair and moved it like black flame. "You call it education. You call it civilization. But I have seen what you do in those tents. I have heard the children cry." She stepped forward, standing with Silas and Eli. A small unit, outnumbered but unmoving. "Shoot me if you want," she said. "But the world will know what you are." Hammond's jaw tightened. His hand dropped toward his pistol. And then from behind him, Captain, one of his own men, young no more than 20, soft-faced, still eyes too honest for army work. "Captain," he repeated, voice low but firm, "there's a boy here. A little boy. I can see that, Private. We're not," the young soldier swallowed. "We're not going to shoot a child." "Are we?" Sir Hammond turned in the saddle. The other soldiers were shifting now, trading uncertain looks, muscles tense, not from readiness, but doubt. Whatever they'd been told at Aiyana, none of them had signed up to put a bullet through a man's son to get to her. Silas could see at fear hesitation, the first cracks in Hammond's authority. The captain looked at his men, then at Silas, then at Eli. Something cold slid through his expression, but his hand moved away from his pistol. "This isn't over, Mercer." His voice had lost its false politeness. It was all threat now. "She can't hide here forever, and when she leaves, I'll be waiting." He turned his horse sharply and rode away, the others following no longer with military crispness, but with the uneasy gait of men relieved to be leaving a line they didn't want to cross. When the last hoofprint disappeared into the snow, Silas exhaled. The breath left him shaky, like something inside had been pulled taut and suddenly released. Eli turned and ran to Aiyana, throwing his arms around her waist. She bent down slowly, placing both hands on his head, fingers curling gently into his hair, in a gesture so protective and tender it made Silas's throat ache. They stood like that for a long time. 3 figures on a weather-beaten porch winter sun, laying a pale gold wash over them. And Silas realized something had changed. They were not 3 separate people anymore. They were something else. Something with edges that were starting to touch shape and hold together. A family, maybe. Or the beginning of one. Day 6. Christmas morning. Silas found Aiyana outside at dawn. She was kneeling in the snow behind the cabin, facing east where the sky had begun to pale. Her hands were pressed to the frozen earth, fingers splayed. Her eyes were closed. Her breath rose in slow, controlled clouds as she whispered words he didn't know, prayer or memory or something older than either. The first sunlight reached her cheek, turning her skin to copper, her hair to black silk. He didn't speak until she opened her eyes. "You're leaving," he said. "I should." She rose, brushing snow from her knees. "Hammond will come back. With more men. With papers. If I stay, I put you and Eli in danger. Eli won't understand." "He will," she said softly. "Children understand more than we think." Silas stepped closer. Close enough to see the faint frost clinging to her lashes, the small scar at the corner of her mouth, the dark bruise fading around her bandaged shoulder. "What if I asked you to stay?" Aiyana went still. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know you saved my son," Silas said. "I know he laughed for the first time in 2 years because of you. I know he sings now. I know he stood in front of 6 armed men because he couldn't bear to lose you." He swallowed hard. "I know I can't do this alone anymore. I've been trying for 2 years, and I'm failing. Eli needs more than I can give him." Aiyana looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression cracked just slightly. "And you?" she asked. "What do you need?" Silas let out a shaky breath. "Fire." The word came before he could stop it. "I've been cold so long, I forgot what warm felt like," he said. "You brought fire into this house. Into my son. Into," he hesitated. The truth felt too big. "Into me." Aiyana reached up and touched his face. He pressed it against his chest, over his heart, the wool of his coat rough against her skin. "Because Claire would have wanted Eli to be happy," he said. "Because she'd want me to be happy. Because love isn't something that runs out. There's room for her memory and for you. There's room for all of it." Aiyana's eyes glistened in the thin morning light. She didn't pull away. If anything, her fingers curled slightly against his coat, holding on. "I am Apache," she whispered. "You are white. The world will not understand." Silas exhaled through his nose, a slow, steadying breath. "The world can go to hell." A sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. Her breath trembled in the cold air. "You are a stubborn man, Silas Mercer." "So I've been told." They were still standing there, too close, not close enough, when Eli appeared at the edge of the yard. Barefoot. Nightshirt hanging crooked on his small frame. Hair sticking up in winter-tangled tufts. His breath puffed in little clouds. He looked at his father, then at Aiyana, then at their joined hands. "Are you staying?" he asked her. Aiyana looked at Silas. His answer was already on his face. He nodded once. "Yes," she said. "I am staying." Something exploded across Eli's face, a smile so bright it seemed to push back the cold. He ran to them and wrapped his arms around both their legs, holding on like they were the only solid things in a world made of snow. "Good," he declared. "Because I made you something." He opened his small fist. In his palm lay a string of beads, Clara's beads. The ones Silas had kept in a small cedar box beneath his bed, tucked away like a fragile piece of the past he couldn't yet let go of. Blue and white glass, threaded with leather cord, worn soft by time. Silas's breath caught. "Mama's necklace," Eli said proudly. "I want you to have it." "So, you remember you belong here now." Aiyana knelt in the snow. Her hands shook when she reached for the beads, as if the weight of what they meant was too heavy to hold. "Eli," she breathed. "Papa said Mama would want us to be happy," Eli said matter of fact. "And you make us happy. So Mama would want you to have it." Aiyana looked at Silas. His throat was too tight for words, but he nodded once, a small, steady nod that said everything. She fastened the necklace around her throat. The blue and white beads lay against the turquoise and red of her medicine pouch, two worlds resting side by side, not fighting, not competing, simply existing together over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli threw his arms around her again. "Merry Christmas." Later, while breakfast simmered and Eli fed the chickens with the solemn responsibility of a king feeding his flock, Aiyana found Silas in the barn. He was standing by the south window, the one